Our journey with childhood cancer started in October 2019. We were a pretty typical everyday family. Tanya and myself and our boys Logan and Toby, who were 4 and 6, living life as any other family would. It ended up what was a cough and what we thought was a cold or some asthma turned out to be an 8 by 6 centimetre tumour in Toby's chest. The tumour was sitting just above his heart and was impeding his airway, which was what was causing the cough. It was the last thing that we're expecting, as with any family at this point in time, but also a complete shock and completely out of the blue. And essentially it meant Toby was RFDS to Perth. The tumour was growing quickly, so his condition was deteriorating quickly, and he needed emergency treatment. He spent a few days in ICU while they treated the mass and got the tumour to retract in size. And he went from a very sick boy to Toby. He was himself again within probably 48 hours of going into ICU. And from his perspective and our perspective, he was good to go. We were good to go home. But unfortunately, the journey from there was from ICU to Ward 1A at PCH, which is the childhood cancer ward or the oncology ward. I'll never forget the feeling of walking into that ward for the first time, and any parent that I've spoken to since says the same thing, that it's a pretty sinking feeling of what lies ahead and the unknown. And at that point in time, you don't have a diagnosis, so we really don't know what we're going to be dealing with. So in the subsequent days, Toby was diagnosed with T-cell lymphoblastic lymphoma. And although all cancer is shit, this is a cancer, if your child is going to have cancer, it's a better one to have. Survival rates are 80–90%, and the treatment process and response is positive. And Toby responded very quickly to treatment. Within a fortnight of presenting at PCH, he started chemo. And that was the start of a 12-month program of intensive chemo, which he got through, let's say, with flying colours. Very few hiccups along the way, but he was very sick and he was very weak throughout that process. I think it took about 5 or 6 weeks into his treatment, and his muscle deterioration was so severe that he could no longer support his own weight. He could no longer walk. He was wheelchair bound, and we spent a lot of time in PCH with Toby, as he was very unwell, but he would also pick up a lot of infections and a lot of temperatures along the way. As a cancer parent, we're always on the lookout for temperature, and if the child's temperature goes above 37.5 for 2 temperatures within 30 minutes or above 38 for 1 temperature, it's an emergency admission to hospital and straight on to antibiotics. So we spent a lot of time in hospital. We moved to Perth. We found a rental in Subiaco, nice and close to the hospital, and that became our new home. And Toby did really well. Logan moved to Subiaco Primary School, and although that year was extremely challenging, we got through it. And in September 2020, we were able to move home. Toby had completed his frontline treatment. He'd moved to long-term maintenance, and we were able to move back to Bunbury and back to our home. That was a big milestone. And the general consensus is that if you have T-cell lymphoblastic lymphoma and you're in remission and you see out your treatment, that your survival rates are almost 100%. Not quite, but almost 100%. Unfortunately for us, in December 2020, the 17th of December 2020, Toby relapsed. And it's the only time where you pray for anything but it being the same cancer again. So the best outcomes for us at that time were that it was a secondary cancer that had been caused by the treatment, and that we would have to start treatment again for a new form of cancer. but the likelihood it was a relapse, and we knew that if it was a relapse that Toby's chances of survival were slim to none. There are only as many cases in the world of a child that's relapsed with T-cell lymphoma. You can count them on your hands, and each of them that has relapsed with T-cell lymphoma we knew had passed away. But we weren't going to give up, and certainly the consultant team that were looking after Toby were not going to give up, and we started a new round of treatment. We joined a trial, and the initial outcome from that treatment was fantastic. The tumour again disappeared. He was moving towards a bone marrow transplant. His older brother Logan was a 100% match for a bone marrow transplant, so Logan was going to donate his bone marrow. But unfortunately, literally days, if not a week, before he was to start his radiation therapy to commence his bone marrow transplant process, he relapsed again whilst under treatment. And that really was, I guess, the nail in the coffin for Toby's treatment, that the cancer had essentially at that point was resistant to treatment. And we got the news that no parent wants to get, is that there's nothing more we can do. So we were told that we'd get a few weeks, maybe a couple of months. We would do some radiation to try and slow the progression of the cancer down. But at that point in time, you have to weigh up how much of this time do we want to spend in hospital versus how much of this time do we want to be spending making memories with Toby. So we did the radiation. We got to spend a great time at Crown with all of our family and made some good memories with Toby. But the reality was, once we got home after he finished his radiation therapy and in that time we spent at Crown, we only got a few days with Toby at home, and he was very unwell, and we weren't confident to be able to handle Toby's palliative care. And there are no palliative care facilities for children in WA. So our option, and our only option, was to take Toby back to PCH. And if anything, it kind of felt right to be at PCH because they So yeah, we weren't able to handle Toby's palliative care ourselves at home, so we brought Toby back to PCH, which kind of felt right because he was with the nurses that had cared for him through his treatment. They knew him so well, and that was it's really a subject I can't talk about. So Toby passed away on the 2nd of April 2021, and it took us a couple of months to decide whether we wanted to pick up and run with the charity. Through Toby's journey of treatment, the kids are put through all and sundry of what most people could only see as torture. Injections, port accessing, NGTs, dozens and dozens of anaesthetics, lumbar punctures. These kids really go through hell, and many of the drugs that the kids are given are saving their lives, but they're also doing them damage. And it's really important that we continue to look and we continue to develop and we continue to improve the method of treatment, the types of drugs that are used, to have less impact on the kids whilst they're under treatment, but also post-treatment. and the impact that those drugs are going to have on them for their entire life. So continuing to fund research to not only improve survival rates, but to improve the side effects and the long-term impacts of the cancer treatment itself is really important and something that we're very passionate about. One of the other things that we really found through the process is that there is a huge lack of funding for cancer research in Western Australia. The cancer research that is undertaken at PCH is second to none. It's world class. We have amazing facilities, we have amazing people, we have amazing researchers, we have people that are dedicating their lives to improving the outcomes for kids with cancer. And yet the more you investigate and the more that you ask and the more that you look into how these programs are run, you realise that the system is very broken. And the research teams are run by people that are completely selfless. They're doing this not for the money, not for gratitude, not for self-interest. They are there purely to try and save kids' lives and improve the outcomes for kids with cancer. But the structures they have around funding and grant applications and funding their research, they spend more time trying to fund that process than they actually do on the process. And when we start to talk to these researchers about how they fund their operations, you start to realise that the smartest ones, the guys and girls that are leading these teams, spend more time writing grant applications and doing paperwork than they do actually working with their team on research. And fundamentally, that is a problem. We're tying up the smartest people with administration. And really what we need to be able to do is change the funding model, increase the amount of funding, and make funding easier to access for them to be able to focus on saving our kids instead of finding the money to do it. Most grant applications are 12 months, which means that all of the researchers are employed on 12-month contracts, but also all of the grants that typically they're receiving in Western Australia are modest in value, which means that they're having to do grant applications. In some circumstances, we're told they're doing grant applications every 6 weeks to try and fund their research. And these are people that by day are treating our kids on the ward and by night are running their research teams, writing grant applications and servicing those grant applications instead of 100% of their focus being on finding a cure, improving the outcome, leading the research. So it's imperative that we make it easier, we make the funding models more efficient so that we can allow the smartest people to focus on saving our kids' lives and not finding the funding to do it. TOBY FCC really is an amazing legacy for Toby, and not only does it create a legacy for him, but from a selfish point of view, it gives me the opportunity to talk about him all the time. So we're pretty happy that the board settled on this name, and it's really thanks to some great people around us and those that have jumped on to be on the board with us, and we're very grateful for all the support that everyone's given us to be able to launch this charity. And we're hoping that we can really honour Toby and really honour his legacy by making a real difference in the outcome for kids with cancer.